Hey guys, good evening. Welcome to my channel. Let's go do your own research. If you're new here, thank you for joining me. If you've been waiting for me to finally finish my reading of Virginia Roberts Giuffre's book Nobody's Girl, then tonight is the night. I don't know why it's taken me so long. I'm like, where has the year gone? Because it seems like it was recently I was reading the book, and it's been like, it was back at Christmas I read the second last bit, and then I was meant to finish it. So yeah, sorry, I should say I read the whole book live and I deleted the last episode, which was 3 hours, by mistake. So then I came back and nearly finished it, and I had the last few chapters, which I'm going to read tonight, because yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of Virginia's passing, and I'm like, yeah, let me do this in honor of her life. Obviously I wasn't around yesterday, so tonight is the night. I just wanted to say quickly as well that I did have a quick look at where we got to on the last reading, and she was just talking about Leslie Wexner. And since I read that, I have done a few more kind of deep dives, live streams that you can go and watch on my channel about Leslie Wexner. I went through his deposition, which was diabolical. He denied knowing Virginia. He denied knowing anything about Maria Farmer. And basically he was just there to seem like he didn't know nothing about Jeffrey Epstein's crimes, which was just very unbelievable. A poor performance over there. I also did a bit of a deep dive into some of the other victims in the Epstein files and how they were treated on social media and that kind of thing, and by the lawyers as well, which I thought was very enlightening. But without further ado, I'm going to get started. So we are on chapter 35, which is called Backlash. Interestingly, on Ellie's 11th birthday in January 2021, we moved our family across Australia from Cairns on the east coast to Perth on the west coast. Queensland had been wonderful when the kids were younger, but now I wanted them to attend the better schools Perth could offer. I continued to be amazed by my children. Ellie, for example, was a force, tall for her age and physically strong. She was also insatiably curious about the world and a big reader. Lately, she discovered a manga series called Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, about a 14-year-old girl and her older brother who have lost their entire family to demons. When the girl becomes a demon too, her brother becomes a demon slayer and vows to transform his sister back into human form. Ellie told me she loved the idea that demons could be rehabilitated and made good again. I was buoyed by her optimism, even as I sometimes struggled to maintain my own. In February 2021, my health worsened. First, I developed a high fever, then a place on my thigh where I'd received a steroid injection became inflamed. My doctors speculated that maybe I was having an allergic reaction to the antibiotic I'd been taking after my neck surgery. But mostly they seemed stumped. Soon, my inflamed thigh turned into a staph infection that refused to heal. Then I got another case of pneumonia. It was as if my immune system was overloaded. I couldn't catch a break. I was still taking a lot of pain meds, among other prescribed medicines, when I had to in mid-June 2021 to give a deposition against Jean-Luc Brunel. The modelling agent had been arrested in Paris the previous December and charged with sexual harassment and the R-word of my victims. No charges of human trafficking were brought initially, but the investigation was continuing and he had not been acquitted of that charge. Part of the investigation involved taking depositions from people like me who'd been assaulted by Brunel. So I bought a plane ticket from Australia to Europe to do my duty. It's kind of crazy that no charges of human trafficking were brought against him at the beginning of the investigation, considering how many models had openly spoken about it. As I described in the introduction to this book, first, I spent several days preparing with Siggy, that is her lawyer, Sigrid Macaulay, and my French lawyers. Then, for 10 hours over a single day, I sat in the same room as Brunel as I was questioned under oath. As expected, his lawyers attempted to impale me on all the sharp words that abusers usually aim at their victims: liar, money grubber, prostitute. While Brunel wasn't supposed to speak to me directly, of course he found a way to do so. He sat in the front row, while I sat behind him in the second row, looking at the back of his skull. At one point, when we took a break, he turned and whispered, "You're a lying bitch," looking at me with the same eyes that had once ogled me. As he forced me to sleep with him, he hissed, "I've never even met you." I saved myself with shopping trips and 2 visits to the Louvre. On my first visit, I found myself facing off with a huge garish tapestry in a room that might as well have been haunted by Epstein and Maxwell's ghosts. A panic attack nearly sunk me, but a few days later, I returned to reclaim that beautiful place for myself. On a shelf in my family room in Perth, I keep the replica I bought that day of Winged Victory of Samothrace, the famous headless statue of god Nike that has been on display at the Louvre since 1883. Compared to the 9-foot-tall original, mine, which I found in the museum's gift shop, stands only about 2 feet high. But its power is immense in that every day it serves as a reminder. Winning isn't possible, but it's worth striving for. The highlight of my visit to France, though, was finally meeting a woman named Taisia Huisman in person. In 1991, when Huisman was 18 and a would-be model, she met with Brunel in Brussels at the urging of her new agents. Brunel, then in his mid-40s, told her that he'd make her a star if she came to Paris immediately. She did, and at his insistence, she stayed in his apartment. But within a week, she was gone. I'm not sure if I hope I pronounced her name correctly. That's because on her fourth or fifth night there, Brunel spiked her drink and R-worded her. Huisman was too ashamed at the time to bring charges against him. But years later, after seeing me on TV, She had reached out to me on Twitter and we'd begun a dialogue. She went public with her charges in 2019, joining several models who would accuse Brunel of SA and the R word. Now it was 2 years later, and she was walking into the lobby of my Paris hotel. We greeted each other with a warm hug, and for the next 2 hours, we shared what we'd been through, sitting closely together on a velvet couch. Wisman, now a TV producer, gave me a copy of the book she'd written, Close Up. Het schokkende verhaal van een Nederlands fotomodel, which meant the shocking story of a Dutch fashion model. She had published this memoir in 2020, and despite the fact that I couldn't read Dutch, getting my own copy meant the world to me. On the cover was a portrait of her stunning face when she was 18, right before Brunel abused her. I held her hand and we both shed tears for what these men had taken from us. Over the summer, Siggy and the rest of my legal team sent a letter to Prince Andrew's lawyers as time was running out to file a lawsuit against him under a New York law extending the statute of limitations for underage SA claims. They didn't receive any response. In early August, the Prince's ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, told the Financial Times that she and Prince Andrew were the happiest divorced couple in the world. A PR move seemingly intended to burnish the Prince's image on the eve of my likely lawsuit. I like to remember these publications and where they've helped with campaigns against abusers. Guess I'm going to have to add Financial Times to the list. On August 9th, 2021, my 38th birthday, 2 key things happened. First, administrators of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund, which had been created after his killing himself to establish a process for survivors of his abuse to bring claims against his estate. So I watched both of the depositions of those guys, his lawyer Darren Indike and his accountant Richard Kahn. Also said if they'd had any inkling that Epstein was doing any of this, they would have stopped working for him immediately. Again, pretty unconvincing. In all, the fund given almost $125 million to about 150 victims. When you add that number to the many who'd settled with Epstein when he was still alive, there were now probably at least 200 victims and likely many more who have come forward to identify themselves and be compensated by Epstein or Epstein's estate. The sheer scale of that effort was and is remarkable. There is that, I guess. The second thing that happened on August 9th was that I was sued. Oh, sorry. That again. The second thing that happened on August 9th was that I sued Prince Andrew in New York State, violating the Child Victims Act. My suit came just 4 days before the look-back window slammed shut. In my claim, I alleged that Prince Andrew had R-word, flattered me when I was a minor, causing me severe and lasting damage. I asked for damages to be determined by the court. As I turned 38, I realised that I'd spent the second half of my life recovering from the first. I was 19 when I met Robbie and set off to make a new life with him. I now lived almost precisely 19 more years, and I was still fighting for justice. I'd come a long way, but I had yet to feel anything in the hole. I wondered if that feeling would ever come. When the news of my lawsuit broke, I guess I should have been surprised when the British tabloid newspaper The Sun tracked down my father in Florida. I support my daughter 100%, Dad said, calling me persistent and brave. The royals are above the law. That's not the way it works. They can't do what they want. People fight back. That's what Virginia is doing. If Prince Andrew puts himself in my position, if this was happening to his daughter, how would he feel? He should be ashamed. Reading those supportive words, my heart softened toward my father, but only for a moment. After all, I knew him to be manipulative, so I suspected that this interview could be his way of trying to get back into my good graces. And given his past behaviour, I couldn't help but wonder, had Dad been paid by the Sun? Initially, the Prince made it difficult for my lawyers to serve him with papers, fleeing to Queen Elizabeth's Balmoral Castle in Scotland and hiding behind its well-guarded gates. This was not a surprise. Back in 2020, prosecutors in the Maxwell case had noted that Prince Andrew had sought to falsely portray himself to the public as eager and willing to cooperate. This was the exact language that every single deposition I've watched, Bill Clinton, Leslie Wexner, Richard Kahn, Darren Indyke have all used those words during their depositions. And yet they've given no information to help with inquiries that I saw. But in fact, he had given no interview to federal authorities and had repeatedly declined requests to talk with investigators. If the Prince had completely shut the door on voluntary cooperation with the US Department of Justice, as prosecutors alleged, it would have been foolhardy to expect that he would make it easy for me. At the end of September, however, a judge scolded Prince Andrew's lawyers for engaging in a game of hide and seek behind palace walls and ruled that service could be made through his US-based lawyers. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that Andrew Bretler? The case then moved forward. Soon we caught a break. A woman named Shukri Walker went public, saying she remembered seeing me dancing with Prince Andrew at the Tramp nightclub in 2001. Just as I'd always said. Walker, who had previously given a written statement to the FBI, said she would happily testify against the Prince if my lawsuit went to trial. Her lawyer would later tell The Guardian that Walker remembered the night clearly because she never saw a royal before or since. She says Prince Andrew was happy, smiling and dancing, and Virginia did not look happy. Another deep dive I did, if anyone interested, was on a formerly Prince Andrew plant defender called Lady Victoria Harvey. A troll. I'd been in the hospital again, having laparoscopic surgery to remove cysts from my ovaries and polyps from my uterus. For weeks leading up to that operation, I'd been bleeding non-stop. Doctors wondered whether my string of health problems were somehow related to the staph infection on my thigh, which was still not fully healed. No one was quite sure of anything, it seemed, except that my body seemed to be staging a revolt. But nothing was going to stop me from helping Ellie prepare for Halloween 2021. For months, she'd been talking about going as Nezuko Kamado, the girl demon in her Demon Slayer manga series. At first, I'd been surprised that my daughter wanted to be a character that had crossed over to the dark side. But Ellie corrected me, saying Nezuko was actually a force for good. Even though a demon had mostly erased Nezuko's memories, Ellie explained her love of her older brother kept her from harming him. While most demons are human flesh to get energy, Nezuko restored herself through sleep. Kind of like you, Mum, Ellie teased, referring to how much time I was spending in bed. Now I threw myself into transforming my beautiful daughter into Nezuko. We got Ellie a kimono and a pair of gita, those traditional Japanese flip-flops with the elevated wooden soles. We even found a way to recreate the bamboo muzzle secured with a sash that Nezuko wears to prevent herself from biting anyone. When we got it all together, my little warrior tried everything on, and she couldn't have been happier. You know, Mama, she said, eventually Nezuko and her brother vanquished the evil around them, and then they live a peaceful life. She was beaming at me as if she'd stumbled upon a secret code for contentment. I hugged her long and hard that day. I'd been trying to protect my daughter from the world's ugliness, but she was developing her own ways of protecting herself and passing strength to me in the process. We have a little drink. Chapter 36, Maxwell on Trial. I want to tell you about a girl named Jane. This opening line, delivered by Assistant U.S. Attorney Lara Pomerantz, kicked off Ghislaine Maxwell's trial on November 29, 2021. Epstein's enabler and co-conspirator was charged with unlawful conduct that spanned from 1994 to 2004 and involved the 3 Maya victims listed in her original indictment and the 4th woman, aged 14, when she was abused, who had been added later. Prosecutors were seeking to prove 1 count of enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal acts, 1 count of transportation of a minor to do the same, 1 count of ex-trafficking of a minor, and 3 counts of conspiracy. Exactly 1 month later, a jury of 12 New Yorkers would reach a verdict. This meant that for the next 4 weeks, I would barely sleep, since it's 12 hours later in Perth. These proceedings were not televised, but every day court was a session. I could be found between the hours of 9 and 5 a.m., 9 p.m. and 5 a.m. Perth time, poring over live tweets from journalists who were in the courtroom. That explains why there was all this cyberbullying, trolling going on Twitter during this trial. Months earlier, the lead prosecutors... One second. Hey, Ghost Cat. Your comments aren't showing up in my on my studio, but good to see you. That's a really good point about the news sites reporting positive things about abusers. Financial Times, really another one bites the dust, right? Especially as they just did an article about the Casios, Michael Jackson's latest accusers. Months earlier, the lead prosecutors, Pomerantz and Maureen Comey, had broken the news to me that I would not be testifying because essentially I would be too big a distraction. For example, if I were a witness, all the men that I had previously named as my abusers would likely be called by the defense as rebuttal witnesses, the prosecutors said. So this contradicts the story or the narrative that Alan Dershowitz very publicly went around claiming. They feared such theatrics would dilute jurors' focus, taking the spotlight off Maxwell. At its heart, prosecuting a case is about creating a clear narrative that jurors find easy to follow. My narrative was complicated, if only because I'd named so many names. The prosecutors acknowledged they wouldn't have been able to build a strong case against Maxwell without the discovery gathered in my prior defamation lawsuit. As I've said, Maxwell was charged separately with 2 counts of perjury that stemmed from her allegedly false testimony in her depositions in my case. But they wanted to tell a straightforward story about Maxwell, the groomer, the procurer, and abuser. I was very disappointed. I had been looking forward to doing my part to send Maxwell to prison. While Siggy tried to console me that I had done my part already, being excluded from this proceeding felt unfair to me. For one thing, I expected that many people would assume prosecutors shut me out because they didn't believe me. Like I said, that's what Alan Dershowitz was banking on. Indeed, just 4 days before the start of Maxwell's trial, Prince Andrew's camp planted a story in the Telegraph that ran under this headline: Virginia Ghislaine Maxwell trial shows she is not a credible witness, says Duke's team. You know who's really not credible? The formerly Prince Andrew, Duke of York. He is really not credible. Everything he said in his interview has been debunked. Or proved a lie, I should say. But that couldn't be helped. More worrisome to me was the possibility that by limiting their case to just 4 victims, none of whom had travelled outside the United States with Epstein as I had, the prosecution might not win. There had been much speculation that Maxwell's lawyers would attempt an empty chair defence, arguing that Maxwell was being blamed for the actions of a man whose death prevented him from coming to court. Epstein, I didn't say that right. Let me say that again. Arguing that Maxwell was being blamed for the actions of a man whose death prevented him from coming to court. Epstein. I worried some jurors would be swayed by that strategy. By now, it was showtime. I tried to look at the bright side. I had been called to testify Had I been called to testify, I would have missed Christmas with my kids. Instead, I hunkered down in Perth, where I'd festooned the house with tinsel and ornaments, crossed my fingers and prayed for justice. Jane, a soap opera actress who testified under a pseudonym, told jurors that Maxwell strolled up to her in 1994 with Epstein trailing behind her when she was a camper at Interlochen Arts Camp in Michigan. Epstein and Maxwell were donors to the renowned summer camp and boarding school. Epstein even had a scholarship lodge named after him. Jane's father had died of leukemia a year before, and her family, who lived in Palm Beach, was short of money, she said. So yeah, it was very interesting during all of the depositions that they were talking about how this fundraising and giving donations to places where students were attending was how they got away with this stuff for so long. Jane thought Maxwell and Epstein were married, so when they realised she lived in Florida and asked for her mother's contact information, she gave it. Later, when she was 14, she agreed to meet with Epstein and Maxwell in Palm Beach. Thus began a years-long cycle of abuse in Florida, New York, and New Mexico. Jane recalled that Maxwell touched her breasts and Epstein made her touch his genitals, engage in group sex, and submit to painful abuse with a vibrator. She was 14. Jane remembered Epstein introducing her to formerly Prince Andrew, and confirmed that she'd been awarded $5 million by the Epstein Victims Fund, though she'd only received $2.9 million of that. That is another thing that we're learning through these testimonies, depositions, Epstein files. These victims, the amount you hear that they get paid, they do not receive that amount, anything like it. Asked about the long-term impacts of her experiences with Epstein and Maxwell, she answered with a question: How do you navigate a healthy relationship with a broken compass? I didn't know what real love was supposed to look like. Maxwell's Dr. Annie Farmer, a licensed psychologist, and Kate, a British model and actress who also used a pseudonym, testified only after the judge instructed jurors that their description of alleged sexual conduct could not be used to convict Maxwell of the crimes charged. That was because Kate was above the age of consent in the jurisdiction in which she had sexual contact with Epstein and Maxwell. She'd been 17 at the time. Annie had been 16 when she was fondled by Maxwell at Epstein's ranch in New Mexico, where a 16-year-old is not considered a minor. I wonder if that's why he bought the ranch there. But both Annie and Kate were used by the prosecution to assert that Maxwell's exploitation of vulnerable teenagers was part of a pattern. Kate, for example, said that Maxwell groomed her for Epstein to abuse, and that after she gave him sexual massages, Maxwell said, "You're such a good girl." Ew. The fourth minor victim was Carolyn, who used only her first name. Carolyn described herself as a middle school dropout who'd been SA'd by her grandfather, and said that I'd introduced her to Maxwell and Epstein in Palm Beach. That testimony was a complete surprise to me. Carolyn said the first time she went to El Brillo Way, I got undressed and told her to keep on her bra and her underwear. She said that after she and I spent 45 minutes massaging Epstein, he turned over and he and I slept together while she watched from a nearby couch. I didn't doubt her account. I've acknowledged that I'd been forced to recruit girls and said that I will always regret it. But I'm ashamed to say that I did not remember Carolyn's name. Carolyn testified that after her initial encounter with Epstein, she'd visited the Palm Beach house 2 or 3 times a week for a period of years. She said she performed sexualized massages that were arranged by Maxwell, who was always in the house when Carolyn arrived. Carolyn also told jurors that Maxwell saw her naked some 30 times in Epstein's massage rooms. Maxwell felt my boobs and my hips and my buttocks and said that I had a great body for Mr. Epstein and his friends, Caroline testified. If I had to distill defense attorney or a measure documents into a single message, it would be this. The alleged victims had at times changed their stories or got details wrong, so their memories couldn't be trusted. I'd been similarly criticised so many times about mistakes I'd made that I'd lost count. Meninger was particularly tough on James, saying in her summation, her lapses of memory pervaded this case. James recalled seeing The Lion King during a period it wasn't on Broadway and attending the late journalist Mike Wallace's 80th birthday party at a point in the chronology that didn't match his age. But Maxwell's own memory expert had testified that while peripheral memories to erode over time, core memories about trauma tended to stick. Maureen Comey, one of the prosecutors, countered Meninger's critique, posing a question to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, which would stand out more in your mind? You were on Mike Wallace's birthday, or how old you were the first time a man molested you? The defense also implied that the 4 accusers, all who had received payouts from the victims fund, were incentivized to exaggerate because they benefited financially from the Epstein money train. Remember, I didn't know this when I was reading this last time, but his main lawyer, Darren Dyke, who was his lawyer from before his 2008 charge, imprisonment, and his accountant, Richard Kahn, were in charge of executing his estate. They were in charge of this fund. But they say they never saw anything untoward going on in all the time that they knew him. They also said they tried to make the process as easy as possible for the victims. So what I'm saying is they give a very different view of it than these lawyers in court. Many said their stories showed the influence of memory manipulation and money. Noted that the checks the women had in their with Epstein's estate had already cleared when they took the stand. That meant that they had nothing more to gain financially from the grim experience of reliving trauma and risking prosecution if they testified falsely. Excellent point. Did that look fun? Comey asked jurors, referring to the victim's sometimes tearful testimony. Why would they put themselves through that when they've already gotten millions of dollars? The other day, I was making a video about Bill Cosby. And he had hundreds of victims as well. And a few of them came out publicly and spoke of what he did to them. They said they never wanted any money. They had money. They were well off. They did it because they were sick of reading or hearing or seeing women that had been victims called liars. In the end, while Maxwell's lawyers had said they would call 35 witnesses, they called only 7, in part because the judge forbade them from letting witnesses testify anonymously. Maxwell opted not to testify on her own behalf. By contrast, while I would have loved to have testified, I was not entirely absent. I saw one report that estimated my name had been mentioned 250 times during the trial. I guess that's the next best thing to be in there. On December 20th, when both sides delivered closing arguments, Comey called Maxwell a sophisticated predator who caused deep and lasting harm to young girls and was crucial to Epstein's sex trafficking operation. She noted that 3 of the witnesses said Maxwell had touched their breasts. It happened again and again, she said. Menninger, meanwhile, argued Maxwell's innocence by posing a question. Oh my God. I've forgotten this bit. Why would a proper Oxford-educated woman do this? The verdict came in on the afternoon of the jury's 5th full day of deliberations. What about all the professors that Jeffrey Epstein was supplying girls to? Just after 5 p.m. on December 29th, the judge read it aloud. Maxwell was guilty of sex trafficking and 4 other charges. She was acquitted of 1 count of enticing a minor to travel across state lines to engage in an illegal act. It was just after 5 a.m. in Perth, and I was asleep in our bedroom, but Robbie was downstairs in the kitchen wide awake. Like me, he'd been sleeping very little. When he saw the news, he bounded upstairs and burst into our room. "Guilty, baby," he was screaming. And I opened my eyes to see him running around the room in circles. "She's guilty." Soon I got on a Zoom with Siggy, who was beaming. "House run. All the counts but 1, she said joyfully. But then her face turned serious. "She's going to prison for a very, very long time, Virginia. And all of that has to do with you. You started this, sweetheart. You did everything to keep it going. There's no way this could have happened without your bravery and commitment. That is heroic. And I watched you go through it. It was a horrible, difficult job. And you did it. And you took some serious hits along the way. I'm so incredibly proud of you right now." Rest in peace, Virginia. After a strong cup of Italian coffee made the way Robbie's parents taught me to make it, I soon took to Twitter to say the verdict had been cathartic for me. My soul yearned for justice for years, and today the jury gave me just that, I wrote. I will remember this day always, having lived with the horrors of Maxwell's abuse My heart goes out to the many other girls and young women who suffered at her hands and whose lives she destroyed. I hope that today is not the end, but rather another step in justice being served. Maxwell did not act alone. Others must be held accountable. I have faith that they will be. I don't know what the angry face emojis are, go cat, but yeah, I feel very emotional reading this right now. It is a heavy read, this book. I think that's why I kind of delayed reading it this last bit, because you've really got to be in the right frame of mind. So we're literally on the last chapter, guys. I think 37. Two more chapters. Okay, chapter 37. Settling up and settling down. On January 12, 2022, my case against formerly Prince Andrew got green light. His lawyers had argued that he was protected from liability by the settlement I'd signed with Epstein way back in 2009. That was a crazy agreement they managed to pull off back then. Really thought that all these co-conspirators were going to get immunity, but Judge Lewis Kaplan rejected that. Prince Andrew can't avoid his day in court, a judge rules, the New York Times headline said. The British press went nuts, calling the decision a huge blow for Prince Andrew, the Evening Standard, and warning of a coming hugely expensive and reputation-shredding court case, Daily Mail. Already, the case had been credited with causing abolish monarchy to trend on Twitter. Now, the day after the judge's decision, the Queen stripped the prince of his royal and military titles, prompting the Sun to run with this front page headline, "Thrown out." That's thrown spelled T-H-R-O-N-E. They love a pun. The Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II was coming up in June. It would be the international celebration marking the 70th anniversary of her ascension to the throne. Clearly, the British media and the royal family itself were already weighing how Prince Andrew's troubles might affect that day. I bet. On January 19th, formerly Prince Andrew deleted all his Twitter, Instagram. He was on Twitter? Instagram and Facebook profiles. 3 days later, Saturday Night Live took a swipe at him, with Weekend Update host Colin Jost saying, "This week, Britain's most eligible bachelor, Prince Andrew, officially deleted his Twitter account after he realised that that's not the app with all the dancing teenagers." 4 days later, the prince formally denied my charges, but his response was met with ridicule. My lawyers, meanwhile, were seeking to depose the prince's former assistant and to see medical records, if any existed, that could prove the prince's assertion that he'd lost the ability to sweat. I mean, the amount of security that must have known about this stuff beggars belief, because it's actually people from the police that do that job, which we're supposed to pay for with our taxes. The prince was not without his supporters. On January 31st, a former girlfriend of his, a socialite named Lady Victoria Harvey, took to Instagram to say that, in her opinion, I was a complete whore. By the way, talking about lying, she has a great history of it and not paying for stuff. Then, just in case anyone had forgotten that this story is not just about sexual abuse, but also about class, she added that I was just a ghetto opportunity who's seriously mixed up. Lady Victoria Harvey's dad is called the Lizard Man or something, like that's his actual nickname. Just saying, go and look on Wikipedia. And also, she hasn't lived in the UK since she was about 2 because her dad didn't want to pay tax. My dad didn't want to pay tax anymore. Never wanted to shirk public duty. Lady Victoria, the daughter of the 6th Marquess of Bristol, yeah, that's him, Lizard Man. I think he went to jail as well for fraud. Half sister of the 7th Marquess and sister of the 8th Marquess, whatever all of that means exactly, would give many mean-spirited interviews about me in the coming months. Charming. The paparazzi, meanwhile, had tracked my family down in Perth. In February, the Daily Mail published this important news. Prince Andrew's accuser, Virginia Guiffre, is spotted vaping with foils in her hair outside salon in Australia as she prepares to take oath and be quizzed by the Duke's lawyers for her essay lawsuit. You can imagine how unflattering the accompanying photos were. I looked like a half-crazed, metal-spiked witch who also was trying to quit smoking. The things we women do in the name of beauty. But most women don't have to worry about such things being captured by photographers. I tried not to let it bother me. The world didn't know it, but settlement discussions with Prince Andrew's team were suddenly moving quickly. After he'd stonewalled us for months, the scheduling of his deposition, which was to take place on March 10th, seemed to motivate him. Also, the newest addition to the Prince's legal team, Andrew Brettler, an American who'd worked for 2 Hollywood figures facing their own Me Too allegations, the actor Armie Hammer and the director Bryan Singer. He's also hired by Alexa Nicholas, just saying, was less reluctant than some of his British counterparts to face reality. David Boyce would later credit Brettler with keeping the settlement talks on track. Siggy, meanwhile, felt we couldn't have been in a better position. She was ready to try the case, and she believed strongly that if we went to trial, we'd prevail. Sorry to just keep interrupting, but more stuff that has come out of the Epstein files is that Epstein was keeping track of all these Me Too abusers. And sort of, it was like a little sort of like Me Too club where they were like, who's going to be next? And it very much feels like they had these anti-Me Too conspiracies going on amongst each other. It's like a little secret club there. And Alan Dershowitz is kind of like the chairman of the anti-Me Too club, given that he's written an actual book on it. Where was I? She was ready to try the case. Siggy, that was Siggy, her lawyer. Siggy, meanwhile, felt couldn't have been in a better position. She ready to try the case, and she believed strongly that if we went to trial, we'd prevail. I'm going to ask for the moon, she told me, which we'd already agreed had to be more than mere money. After casting doubt on my credibility for so long, Prince Andrew's team had even gone so far to try as to hire internet trolls to handle me. People like Lady Victoria Harvey, George Tonks, House in Habit was one of them. This is documented in the Epstein files. A couple of British YouTubers got a mention as well. The Duke of York owed me an apology as well. We didn't get a confession, of course. That's what settlements are designed to avoid. But we were trying for the next best thing, a general acknowledgement of what I'd been through. I mean, that is what the Epstein's estate did want. They granted an acknowledgement by giving all those payments. Even though there was never a trial. After my lawyers hashed out the basic details on Zoom, I then participated in 2 days of mediation talks. Finally, at 2:30 a.m. Florida time, the prince's lawyers agreed to the statement we'd been pushing for. Siggy called me immediately and read it to me through tears, both hers and mine. Formerly Prince Andrew has never intended to malign Miss Guiffre's character, the statement read in part, and he accepts that she has suffered both as an established victim of abuse and as a result of unfair public attacks. Yes, indeed, including attacks from the prince's own camp. It is known that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked countless young girls over many years, the statement continued, acknowledging vastly more about Epstein's predatory behaviour than the prince himself had in his fateful BBC interview. Prince Andrew regrets his association with Epstein and commends the bravery of Miss Guiffre and other survivors in standing up for themselves and others. He pledges to demonstrate his regret for his association with Epstein by supporting the fight against the evils of sex trafficking and by supporting its victims. In that moment, I would have given anything to be in the same room with Siggy. Thank you, Siggy, for all that you've ever done for me, I told her shakily over the phone. She responded by repeating her assertion that representing me had been her complete honour. At the end of my life, Siggy would tell me later, when I look back on the best moments, that phone call will be one of them. On February 15th, the settlement was announced. We issued a joint statement that made clear formerly Prince Andrew would pay me money, though the amount was kept confidential. Later, it was reported that his mother, the Queen of England, had footed the bill. I'll tell you who didn't foot the bill. Him. The statement said also make a substantial donation in support of victims' rights to my nascent non-profit organisation. I agreed to a 1-year gag order, which seemed important to the prince because it ensured that his mother's platinum jubilee would not be tarnished any more than it already had been. Because of the time difference, the settlement announcement came in the middle of our night in Australia. That meant when we woke up the next day, Alex's birthday, our street was choked with paparazzi. The Gervais family has a tradition. On their birthdays, all the kids get to go shopping to pick out their own gifts. I still wanted to do that, but Robbie wasn't sure we'd be able to get out the driveway. For a moment, I considered going out and throwing myself at the mercy of the reporters. My plan was to say I was pleased with the settlement, then explain that it was 6 weeks and politely ask if we could have our privacy back. But then I came to my senses. Were I to try that and then attempt to take Alex to the mall, the headlines would surely read, Epstein's survivor rushes out to start spending formerly Prince Andrew's money, or some such. Robbie and I talked about it, and in the end, we promised Alex a rain check, and we all stayed home and got cake, beer, and flowers delivered. 3 days later, Jean-Luc Brunel was found dead in the French prison where he'd been held for more than 2 years. He had hanged himself. I did not give any interviews. 2 months earlier, a few weeks before Maxwell was convicted, my French lawyer had gotten in touch saying Brunel was about to be let out on bond. I told the lawyer that I couldn't come to Paris at that moment, but I needed him to go to court for me and argue against Brunel's release. That effort had succeeded. Thank God for that. But now Brunel was dead. The suicide of Jean-Luc Brunel, who abused me and countless girls and women, ends another chapter, I tweeted. I am disappointed that I was not able to face him in a final trial and hold him accountable for his actions, but gratified that I was able to face him in person in Paris to keep him in. That same day, a consultant I'd hired to help me get my charity organised received this email, whose subject line read simply, explain. The email read, maybe Virginia can explain how this sellout from Andrew provided justice to all the girls affected by this. She sold everyone out and is just as bad as Epstein, Maxwell, now dead Jean and Andrew. Hashtag no sympathy. We decided not to respond to the sender of this email, though she signed her name. But I'd like to address what she said here. Everyone is entitled to his or her opinion, of course, but to acquaint me with 4 of my abusers is wrong-headed and even cruel. As with Maxwell, I'd sued Prince Andrew in federal court, which meant a financial settlement was always going to be the prime form of punishment if we were successful. But I'd gotten more out of him than that, an acknowledgement that I and many other women had been victimized, and a Taggart pledge to never deny that again. Finally, my receipt of funds settlement has enabled me to finally make good on a long-standing goal of mine to spend less of my energy unpacking the past and more on helping people in the present. In November 2021, I'd relaunched my non-profit, now called Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, or SOAR, new website, and it's set about updating its mission statement and the way it would be run. Respectfully, I was attempting to help survivors of abuse, the opposite of what Epstein had done. I only wish it hadn't taken me so long. All through this period, I was buoyed by the knowledge that Robbie and I had organised an amazing vacation, a hard-to-get reservation on the Ningaloo coast, a coral reef so pristine that it has been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The kids were excited to swim alongside whale sharks. Me, I just wanted to get some sleep. My neck was hurting so much, and the painkillers I was taking were making me dizzy and disorientated. But just when we were getting ready to travel, Robbie and Alex came down with COVID. I called Ningaloo to cancel. Then I got COVID too. Over the next several days, my blood oxygen level went lower and lower. When my hands and feet went numb and my left arm felt as if it had fallen asleep for good, Robbie didn't wait for an ambulance. He packed me in the car and took me straight back to the hospital. I've told you how cunning an enemy trauma can be. It hides in the shadows, then takes control of one's psyche without warning. That's what happened as I lay in that hospital bed in Perth. All my feelings of sadness and shame overtook me. I was worn out by the near constant pain in my neck. I was weary of defending myself against vicious, hurtful words. Liar, sellout, extortionist, drug addict, whore. I was sick of the nightmares. Greedy, heaving men on top of me. Men whose faces I recognized and would never forget. Men whose faces I didn't recognize. Alarmingly, I see now, I wasn't afraid anymore. Instead, I just felt hollowed out. So when my trauma tricked my brain into telling me lies, I listened. It would be better for everyone if you weren't here, my brain said. You bring nothing but stress and worry into your husband and children's lives. Why should they suffer because Jeffrey and Jelaine caused you pain? You have let your family down. They deserve better. They will be happier without you. My trauma took aim at my very existence. Aren't you exhausted? Unconsciousness would be a relief. Robbie and the kids are safe at home, so none of them will find you. It won't hurt a bit. The pills are on the bedside table. It will be easy. You can just quietly slip away. I should have given a trigger warning, but I actually forgot about this bit being so traumatic. I believed my brain, so I reached for the painkillers that I had smuggled into the hospital. And I swallowed as many as I could. Later, they'd estimate 240 pills before I passed out. That's crazy. I'm told that I was revived with Narcan, the opioid overdose treatment. My fragile self-worth had imploded. All that remained were the shards of me. Oh, the look on Robbie's face when they told him. He couldn't bear the thought of me disappearing, and he wanted to strangle me for trying to disappear. What were you thinking, Jenna? He demanded. But in my mind, I had no answer for him except I was thinking I needed to be dead. Indeed, just days later, after I got out of the hospital, I would try to do that again with more pills. It was only because our son Alex came to check on me that I did not succeed. For a second time, I woke up in the hospital, revived once more by Narcan. After that, it would be a long time before my thoughts of self-annihilation would truly begin to subside. Only then could I promise my husband and kids that I would try with all my might to believe that I mattered. So sad. There is a huge framed picture on our wall in Perth, right at the centre of our home. I placed it there at the landing at the bottom of the stairs so that everyone in the family can see it multiple times a day. It's a photograph of a cove on the magnetic island in Queensland, a place where years ago, before Ellie was born, Robbie and I had taken our young sons on our first holiday vacation. We had no money back then. We were living paycheck to paycheck. But after Robbie was rear-ended by that Sydney police officer, he'd gotten a settlement to cover his medical expenses and we'd used it to take our boys, ages 2 and 3, on this trip. I remember we caught the ferry to Nelly Bay Harbour, and we didn't come home for 6 whole weeks. When I think about places where I have been truly happy, Magnetic Cove tops the list. The island was crawling with koala bears and the fishing was ridiculously good. Mackerel, tuna, sea perch, you could catch them all. And Robbie and the boys did. For my part, I walked the palm-fringed beaches collecting bits of coral and other treasures. This trip of ours was in 2009. In 2022, as I recovered from my attempts to take my own life, it felt like an eon ago. But I still thought about that vacation almost every day. In my brain, Magnetic Island had come to symbolize a path I hadn't taken. I imagined I might have lived a beautiful life there, free from all troubles, safe from all dangers, anonymous. In this fantasy, I did what most people who endure childhood trauma do. Process it privately, sometimes without telling a single person other than perhaps a trusted therapist. In other words, in this fantasy, I'd made a choice that was the polar opposite of the one I'd made in real life. This idyll would never be my reality. I knew that, but imagining it helped me. I've said that I'm a visual person, always have been. Since childhood, I have been able to remember images, faces, details others miss. If I make a notation in the margin of the book I'm reading, my brain registers the placement of that scribble so I can easily find it again. I am buoyed by bright colours, so it makes sense that in my darkest time, I turn to something visual for comfort. In the weeks after I tried to take my own life, I must have stared for hours at that oversized photo of Magnetic Island. I'd bought it for Robbie in happier times. I really, truly wanted to be happy again. But there was something else that helped me just as much, or maybe even more. I've told you how much music has helped me throughout my life, and I've described how we Guiffres enjoy music together as a family. Well, Alex, that's her son, was recording music now, mixing it together in his room on his computer, commissioning beats and vocal tracks from various musicians he'd connected with online. Now Alex played me one of his favourite compositions. It was called Smile Sadness, and it started with a spare ukulele track, then segged into Alex's rapping lyrics that could have been plucked straight out of my brain. There are demons in my mind, circling me like a haze. It's amazing. I can't get up today. I've got to push for it. I cannot go back. If I go back, I'll be in an effing trap. But it was another line in the song that really made me sit up straight. I don't know what I'd do without you. Listening to that song, that's when I vowed to get better, once and for all. For Alex, for Tyler, for Ellie, for Robbie, of course, but most of all for myself. In April, Judge Alison J. Nathan had rejected Maxwell's request for a new trial, denying her claim that her jury could not have been fair or impartial because one juror failed to disclose his own experience of SA. Now it was late June, and the day had finally come for Maxwell to be sentenced. Because of my health problems, my doctors said I couldn't fly to New York to deliver a victim's impact statement, as I'd long planned to do. But Siggy said she would read it for me in open court. Even before she got a chance to do so, however, a copy of my statement that had been provided to the court made headlines. Andrew's sex accuser says Ghislaine Maxwell opened door to hell for abuse, blared UK's Daily Mirror. Ironic, considering that's the paper her dad used to own. Atop a story that quoted from my statement, Jelaine, 22 years ago in the summer of 2000, you spotted me at the Mar-a-Lago Hotel in Florida, and you made a choice. You chose to follow me and procure me for Jeffrey Epstein. Just hours later, you and he abused me together for the first time. Together, you damaged me physically, mentally, sexually, and emotionally. Together, you did unspeakable things that still have a corrosive impact on me to this day. I want to be clear about one thing without question. Jeffrey Epstein was a terrible pedophile. But I never would have met Jeffrey Epstein if not for you. For me, and for so many others, you opened the door to hell. And then, Jelaine, like a wolf in sheep's clothing, you used your femininity to betray us, and you led us all through it. At Maxwell's sentencing hearing on June 28th, 2022, Annie Farmer, Sarah Ransom, and another survivor sister, Elizabeth Stain, were in the courtroom to deliver their victim impact statements in person. Siggy read mine. John Nathan listened to everyone, including Maxwell's lawyers and the prosecutors, then told all those assembled, the damage done to these young girls was incalculable. Then she revealed that Maxwell, then 60, would be sentenced to 20 years in prison, plus 5 years of supervised release. She was also ordered to pay a $750,000 fine. With good behavior, she could leave prison in her late 70s. The survivor sisters rejoiced. Together, we'd succeeded in sending one of our most malicious abusers, the woman who'd used her gender to trick so many of us into feeling safe, even as she put us in the worst sort of danger, to prison. It's just a shame that Ghislaine Maxwell is the only one in prison for this. It's actually crazy. We hadn't gotten what I told Gail King I really hoped for, an apology. Judging by the jailhouse interviews Maxwell had begun giving, she was unrepentant. Nevertheless, she'd been held accountable. Despite all her haughty denials, despite her attempts to diminish us as money-grabbing opportunists, a judge and a jury had seen through her. For all of us, that was the best thing. We'd been believed. Unfortunately, any happiness I felt about Maxwell spending most of her remaining years in prison was dampened by the fact that around this time, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, a chronic, long-lasting condition that causes heightened pain and tenderness throughout the body, as well as fatigue and sleep problems. This was not exactly good news, although there was some relief in knowing I wasn't crazy. The pain was real. Terrible. Because she's already obviously got a problem with painkillers. In October, I bought Robbie a used powerboat. He's always loved the water, and this vessel had been enough beds, couches, and benches. And this vessel had enough beds, couches, and benches down below that our whole family could sleep on board at the same time. Its previous owner had painted its name, the Renaissance, on the hull in dark blue script. I told Robbie he could change that, but he said no, the Renaissance was perfect. For us, he said,
A revival was long overdue. I knew what he meant. He was hoping I would renew my interest in life. I wanted that too. I was taking it one day at a time. As usual, I relied on music to lift me up. Alex was playing me more and more of his tunes, and I couldn't have been more proud of him. I also clung to Sarah Bareilles' song Brave, which I'd first heard right around the time I'd said goodbye to my father for the last time. Sometimes a shadow wins, she sang, describing my lowest feelings perfectly. But then she helped me rally. Maybe there's a way out of the cage where you live. Maybe one of these days you can let the light in. Show me how big your brave is. On November 8th, 2022, I announced a settlement between me and lawyer Alan Dershowitz, the Harvard professor emeritus and friend of Epstein's, who I'd sued for defamation in 2019. In a joint statement, just for that act alone deserves so much respect. In a joint statement, I said, I have long believed that I was trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein to Alan Dershowitz. However, I was very young at the time. It was a very stressful and traumatic environment, and Mr. Dershowitz has from the beginning consistently denied these allegations. I now recognise I may have made a mistake in identifying Mr. Dershowitz. I may have made a mistake. When I had sued Dershowitz in 2019, I'd alleged that he had made defamatory statements about me after I accused him. He had countersued 7 months later. This settlement put an end to both of these claims. No payments were made by either of us to the other, and we agreed that we would say nothing about one another other than the agreed statements we made in a joint release. I wonder if he agreed to pronounce her name correctly. In that release, Dershowitz said of me that he had come to believe that at the time she accused me, she believed what she said. She has suffered much at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, and I commend her work combating the evil of sex trafficking. Let's just say that again one more time, so I don't think this gets enough publicity. Dershowitz said he had come to believe that at the time that Virginia accused me, she believed what she said. She has suffered much at the hands of Jeffrey Epstein, and I commend her work combating the evil of sex trafficking. The next day, I got an email from Dr. Annie Farmer. Annie and her sister Maria had been fighting for justice longer than any of the survivor sisters, and I'd gotten to know both of them over the years. Annie's words meant everything to me because she so clearly understood my emotional state. Hi, Virginia. I just wanted to send a note because I imagine everything transpiring over these last few days and throughout this long legal fight you've been battling has been really difficult. I just wanted to let you know that you are on my mind and I'm sending big hugs and lots of love. You have focused for years now on helping others and being a strong voice in this fight. I know your advocacy will continue, but I also hope that you can find the space you need for rest and healing and soaking up time with your family with some relief from all the pressure these cases have brought with them. XOXO Annie. I had really needed some peace. My family had too. Now, at long last, we would set about trying to find it again. Okay, guys, we're on the last chapter. Let's take a deep breath. One more sip of water. I don't know why my nose always itches when I'm okay. Chapter 38. This is called Nobody's Girl. That's the name of the book. As I was beginning to work on this book, one of my sons invited a new friend over. And when his mother, a woman I'd never met before, dropped him off, I invited her inside. When she sat down at our kitchen island, I offered her a cold drink, which is right about the time that she recognized me. "Oh, my God," she said, "it's you." I smiled and nodded. This had happened to me before. The woman was uncomfortable, I could see. Her eyes were darting around as if she was now unsure what to say. For a moment, the fact that I was a well-known survivor of sexual abuse hung awkwardly in the air between us. Then the woman kindly said, "It's okay. We don't have to talk about it. It's probably embarrassing." I kept smiling, even though inside I felt an old twinge, be ashamed. I'd been a child when I was abused by adults. "No, it's not embarrassing," I replied, "and we should be talking about it, because this is happening out there, and it's going to continue to happen unless we talk about it." Not wanting to sound as if I were lecturing her, I suggested we go out for a drink sometime, out of the earshot of our kids. Sexual trafficking should not be a secret, only to be whispered about in hushed tones or not at all. It is a horrible, trauma-inducing crime, and we must talk about it if we ever want it to end. That's part of why I wrote this book, and I've tried on every page to be transparent. I've made mistakes in my life, and I've had moments I'm not proud of, but I haven't let those human flaws keep me from telling my story. As my collaborator and I worked together to finish this book, she sent me a line by the writer Helen Rosner that rings true to me. "Memoir is the art of shining a light behind you, picking at the stitches of your life to see how it was made." That's what I've tried to do, to examine my life in the hope of destigmatizing victims' experiences. Because only by speaking out can we move ourselves and others to act. I'm sorry to say that for all that's happened, more action is needed, much more. Because some people still think Epstein was an anomaly, an outlier. Yeah, we're not getting any further forward with that. And I've really tried to do some content about it, to examine the Epstein files, to do commentary on the depositions, to try and analyze what these people are saying, to try and debunk it. It's just not getting a lot of attention from the people that should be giving it attention. Because the sex trafficking is one aspect of it. It's how they use their money. It's all interlinked. Those people are wrong. While the sheer number of victims Epstein preyed upon may put him in a class by himself, he was no outlier. The way he viewed women and girls as playthings to be used and discarded is not uncommon among certain powerful men who believe they are above the law. So many emails where they're being talked about, when I say they, girls, women, people being talked about like objects, like it's nothing, bits of meat, and names, and we know who these people are. They're named. But they all deny it. While the sheer number of victims Epstein preyed upon may put him in a class by himself, he was no outlier. The way he viewed women and girls as playthings to be used and discarded is not uncommon among certain powerful men who believe they are above the law. And many of those men are still going about their daily lives, enjoying the benefits of their power. Do you know what I've realised as well? It's not that just that they believe they're above the law, it's that they can use the law to their advantage. If they even get caught or charged. Don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who say they didn't know what Epstein was doing. Anyone who spent any significant amount of time with Epstein saw him touching girls in ways you wouldn't want a creepy old man touching your daughter. I fully believe it. I fully believe that he didn't even hide this. Also, the images he had on the walls, all of it. How could they have not known what was going on? At least had a feeling. But you know what else came out of the depositions, yeah? I haven't really seen anyone talking about this. In both cases, Richard Kahn and Darren Indike, they were young when they started working for Epstein. He put them in debt to him very early on in their life. When I say in debt, I'm talking about financial. He loaned them money. In the case of Darren Indike, I think it was like $1 million, but he paid for his IVF treatment. How was that guy ever going to turn on him after that? Don't be fooled by those in Epstein's circle who say they didn't know what Epstein was doing. Anyone who spent any significant amount of time with Epstein saw him touching girls in ways you wouldn't want a creepy old man touching your daughter. They can say they didn't know he was R-wording children, but they were not blind. Not to mention the fact that many prominent people were still associating with him years after his conviction. Epstein offered many of the men in his circle sex with females he and Maxwell trafficked, both girls and women. I know because I lived it. But even the men who didn't partake of the favours Epstein offered could see the naked photos on his walls and the naked girls on his islands, or by his swimming pools. Epstein not only didn't hide what was happening, he took a certain glee in making people watch, because he could. And people did watch. Scientists, fundraisers from the Ivy League, and other heralded institutions, titans of industry. They watched and they didn't care. Epstein is dead, but the attitude that allowed him to do what he did, it's alive and well. Yes, Me Too has led to certain prominent men losing their jobs. Other men have gone to prison. But just because justice has been served in a handful of high-profile cases doesn't mean we've solved the larger problem. A culture that tells girls their primary worth is to appeal to men. A culture that tells men that young girls are the ideal. The younger, as Epstein said, the better.
I'm not saying those cultural trends cause most men to become child molesters, but I do believe that because of those societal forces, when a molester shows his face, many people tend to look the other way. Right? Make excuses up for them. Don't want to believe it. It's happening all over YouTube. It's crazy. Even as I've chronicled my history with Epstein and Maxwell, much has happened to keep the two of them in the news. The sale of Epstein's properties, for example. His Palm Beach home was sold to a developer for $18.5 million. It has been torn down and is being redeveloped with a different address. In the future, there will be no number 358 on El Brillo Way. Epstein's Manhattan townhouse sold for $51 million. His two islands in the Caribbean sold for $60 million, roughly half what they were listed for a year earlier, to a developer who plans to build a 75-room resort there. Disgusting. Why would you want to do that? His New Mexico ranch, listed for $27.5 million in July 2021, sold to an anonymous buyer for an undisclosed sum in August 2023. And most recently, his Paris apartment sold to a Bulgarian investor for £8.2 million. The money raised in these transactions has gone to Epstein's estate, which has helped fund restitution for victims. As expected, Maxwell, who resides in an all-female, low-security facility in Tallahassee, has appealed her conviction. Didn't she get moved? In August 2024, that appeal was denied. She also gave an interview from prison in which she repeated the lie that the photo Epstein took of Andrew with his arm around me as a fake. That rumour was also propagated by Lady Victoria Harvey. In response, Michael Thomas, the New Zealand photographer who visited me in Australia back in 2011 and took a photo of my original photo front and back, came forward to say definitively it's not fake and it never has been. Not all men are monsters. Now, when I did my little deep dive onto her, I think she was on like Piers Morgan or something, one of those stupid anti-Me Too channels, because he basically is. I don't remember him saying that. He could easily not be giving these people a platform to spout this. It's just hate. Stirring up hate. In the wake of my settlement with Alan Dershowitz, various media outlets have suggested that Prince Andrew might try to overturn his and my settlement agreement. The Sun in London reported, for example, the scum, otherwise known as the scum, that the disgraced royal was consulting with US lawyers and hoping to force a retraction or even an apology. David Boyes fired back in a wide-ranging interview with the Daily Mail. If they want to get out of the settlement, he said, all they have to do is call me and let me take Andrew's deposition and go to trial. To date, Boyes has received no such call. Formerly Prince Andrew, meanwhile, was allowed to attend King Charles III's coronation in May 2023, but with no formal role and a third-row seat. In Trafalgar Square, hundreds of anti-monarchy protesters stood among a throng of royal supporters waiting for the coronation procession to pass. And I enjoyed looking at photos of the placards they held online. Many people held signs that read, "Not my king," And one protester lifted a large hand-lettered banner that said simply, "God save Virginia Guiffre." There is an organisation that are trying to bring down the monarchy called Republic. I went to their event it was about a year ago actually, in May. You can see it on my channel. I didn't do a live stream, but I made a video of it. It's very informative. It was kind of like a rally event in Trafalgar Square. I suggest you watch it. I'm not sure if it'll be on this year, but the guy that runs that organization, it's down to him that Andrew was arrested. He put pressure on the police about it, about what was released in the Epstein files with the financial misconduct. Various Epstein-related lawsuits have continued to make their way through the courts. In March 2023, a judge ruled that two banks who had Epstein as a customer for several years, Deutsche Bank and JP Morgan Chase, had to face lawsuits alleging that the banks profited from Epstein's sex trafficking operation, literally in emails talking about it. Even saying, you know, this is getting a bit much. When are we going to get rid of him? He had lawsuits out against them, so they couldn't. They stood to lose too much money. It's always about. Both banks soon reached tentative settlements, promising approximately $75 million and $290 million, respectively, to the plaintiffs. Don't know where that came from. More than 40 women who said the banks had facilitated Epstein's abuse of them. I was among the plaintiffs in the JP Morgan class action. JP Morgan also eventually settled a lawsuit filed by the US Virgin Islands, agreeing to significant commitments to curtail human trafficking and a $75 million payment. That suit alleged that Jess Staley, a former top executive at the bank, may have been involved in Epstein's sex trafficking operation. Court papers in that case show that Epstein shared photographs of young women with Staley, and that the two men emailed each other using what appeared to be code words based on Disney characters. That was fun. Say hi to Snow White. Staley, then 53, emailed Epstein in July 2010. So I guess this was before we saw that. The reason why he was saying that, it would seem, is because he's dressing them up as characters from, like, Snow White. Like, there's an actual photo of a girl dressed up as Snow White in Epstein's way, in his townhouse, mansion, whatever it is. And then the next day that photo was taken, and there's actually a message about, can you go out and get a costume? And then there's this photo, and then the next day is him going, that was fun, say hi to Snow White. So it's not really code language. Like, they actually didn't give a F. They were doing this in plain sight. There was also conversations on email about bringing lots of Eastern Europeans over, getting them visas illegally. What character would you like next? Then 57 replied. Beauty and the Beast, Staley responded, to which Epstein replied, well, one side is available. It's not hard to imagine what Epstein meant. He had beauties at the ready.
The other day, Ellie and I were in the car heading to her volleyball practice when she took control of the stereo and queued up a song called Mad at Disney, performed by Salem Elise. "You have to listen to this, Mum," she said, pushing play. "I'm mad at Disney, Disney. They tricked me. Had me wishing on a shooting star." Ellie sang at the top volume over the music. She knew all the words. "My fairy grandma warned me Cinderella's story ended in a bad divorce," she sang. "The prince ain't sleeping when he takes his sleeping beauty to the motel on his snow white horse." Ellie shot me a glance. At 13, she's more than she lets on. As I've said, I watched Cinderella on repeat when I was a child, and I internalized some of the messages it taught me about femininity and what happiness looks like for a girl. As a young mother, I went into a baby boutique before Ellie's birth and I said I wanted everything princess. But now, as the mother of teenagers, I appreciate that my daughter is more skeptical than I was about some of the pressures and stereotypes society puts on girls of all ages. Pressure to be a good girl is everywhere, and the last thing I wanted to do in this book is to place more of that pressure on anyone, particularly on survivors of abuse. I've written a lot about bravery because I admire people who do what is right, even when that comes at a cost. But I want to be clear, while we need to be brave about naming our abusers, we must also protect ourselves. You may notice that while I've named some men in this book, I have not named all the men I was trafficked to. Partly that is because I still don't know some of their names. Partly too, that is because there are certain men who I fear naming. The men who brutally barred me toward the end of my time with Epstein and Maxwell, for example, the man whom I've called the former minister in court documents. I know his name, and he knows what he did to me, even though when others have sought comment from him about my allegations, he has denied them. I fear this man will seek to hurt me if I say his name here. So I'm pretty sure the man she's talking about there is Ehud Barak, who was literally besties with Epstein. He actually was running for president of Israel against Netanyahu. There are other men whom I was trafficked to who have threatened me in another way by asserting that they will use litigation to bankrupt me. One of those men's names has come up repeatedly in various court filings, and in response, he has told my lawyers that if I talk about him publicly, he will employ his vast resources to keep me in court for the rest of my life. While I have named him in sworn depositions and identified him to the FBI, I fear that if I do so again here, my family will bear the emotional and financial brunt of that decision. That's got to be Wexner. I have the same fears about another man who I was forced to have sex with many times. I shouldn't be speculating, sorry, but it's hard not to when you have these people going on record blatantly lying. I have the same fears about another man whom I was forced to have sex with many times, a man who I also saw having sexual contact with Epstein himself. I would love to identify him here, but this man is very wealthy and very powerful. And I fear that he too might engage me in expensive life-ruining litigation. Maybe that is Wexner was asked about whether he was gay, and he said absolutely not. I'm so straight. He said, I'm super straight. I do not make this decision to hold back lightly. Part of me wants to shout from the highest rooftop the names of every man who ever used me for sex. Some readers will cry my reluctance to name many of my abusers. If I am indeed a fighter for justice, why have I not called them out? My answer is simple. Because while I have been a daughter, a prisoner, a survivor, and a warrior, my most important role is that of a mother. First and foremost, I'm a parent, and I won't put my family at risk if I can help it. Maybe in the future I will be ready to talk about these men, but not now. In the meantime, there is important work to do. We need to make it easier to punish those who victimize others. Siggy and I want to eliminate laws that limit the period in which survivors can seek justice for their abusers. As I've said, New York State has made a lot of progress, first by opening up a look-back window for child victims of SA, and then, in November 2022, by passing the Adult Survivors Act, a year-long window when people who are SA'd as adults can file civil suits against their alleged abusers, no matter how long ago the assaults occurred. After the Child Victims Act opened its window, more than 10,000 lawsuits were filed, mine among them. Other states have made changes as well. In 2020, my childhood home of Florida passed new legislation titled Donna's Law, named after Orlando resident Donna Hedrick, who was allegedly abused by a former high school teacher in the early 70s. This law removed the statute of limitations for prosecuting acts of sexual battery committed against children younger than 18 years of age. However, the law only applied to crimes committed on or after July 1, 2020. There was no look-back window. Federally, probably because they would have not been able to honour the financial commitments that could have burdened them with. Federally, meanwhile, numerous updates have been made to the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, TVPA, of 2000. In 2022, President Joe Biden signed the Eliminating Limits to Justice for Child Sex Abuse Victims Act, which struck from the books the statute of limitations for TVPA claims brought by minor victims of SA, human trafficking, forced labour, and CP. After Biden did so, more states eliminated statutes of limitations, and lawmakers in other states, such as California, proposed bills that would do the same. Currently, in California, if a person is SA'd before the age of 18, they must file a claim, a civil claim, before turning 40. Awareness is growing about the need for change, and now that my settlement from Andrew has come through, I have begun the slow process of turning my fledgling foundation, SOAR, SOAR, into a professionally run organisation. My goal is for SOAR to combat human trafficking by supporting organisations that focus on prosecution, protection, and prevention. That part. Eventually, I plan to make grants that make it easier for members of the public to detect trafficking when they see it and that support victims' recovery. I look forward to disseminating some of the Crown's money to do some good. But frankly, I need a rest. While finishing this book, I've had many setbacks. I've had a second surgery on my broken neck, but it still causes me immense pain. Doctors believe I may need a third. And my mental health has faltered at times too, as it may continue to falter for the rest of my life. Lately, my doctors have prescribed me a series of ketamine treatments that seem to be helping to untangle my PTSD. Still, though, I'm learning to accept that sometimes I will simply not be okay. That is the price of serious trauma. It lays you low and sometimes makes you your own worst enemy. My goal now is to end the emotional time bomb that lives inside me. My toxic memories, devastating visualizations of myself being hurt from ever detonating again. But sometimes I have trouble holding to that goal. There have been silver linings to my recent struggles. My mother and I have been talking more frequently on FaceTime for the first time. She's told me she was sorry for what my father did to me when I was a child. I should have been there for you, she told me through tears. To finally hear and see her acknowledge my experience had more power than I'd ever realized it would. But nevertheless, I have found myself yearning for a lasting peace. Recently, the second of 2 televised dramas I told you were in the works about formerly Prince Andrew's interview with the BBC's Emily Maitlis aired on Amazon Prime Video. The 3-part miniseries, A Very Royal Scandal, which is based on a book by Maitlis, focuses mostly on the planning, execution, aftermath of that BBC interview. And I learned a few things while watching it, though I'll admit I grimaced when the miniseries producers chose to use actual footage of me talking and to end the show with a close-up of my actual 17-year-old face. But there's a particular scene in the show's final episode that really affected me. In the wake of her sit-down with the prince, Maitlis has been heralded around the world for her brilliant interview. But now she is sitting with her laptop in her darkened kitchen, playing back audio of herself being interviewed. The topic: a stalker whose relentless fixation with Maitlis upended her life before he received an 8-year prison sentence. When Maitlis's husband enters the kitchen and hears what she's listening to, he asks her why. Because, she tells him, I wanted to remember how it felt to be interviewed about something that wasn't my fault. Yet they still had to be witnessed. They still had to, parade their pain in the hope of even the slightest justice. I'm not saying that what happened to me was even, remotely similar. Of course it wasn't. But just the parading, the endless bloody talking about it to get anyone to take it seriously. Remember that? Her husband nods. He does remember. And that's true of every woman who ever complained about any kind of harassment. It's all about power imbalances. Maitlis, played by the actress Ruth Wilson, continued. Always uphill, always against the tide, always a battle against the unspoken. The look in their eyes that says, really? Did he really? When I sat down with Prince Andrew, I was only ever hoping to ask the right questions. I didn't know how he'd be or what he'd say, but it was the arrogance, the entitlement. He just couldn't help himself. The way that certain men, whatever their sickness, assume certain rights without giving it a second thought. Their want, their need, their impulse. To which I say, exactly. For 14 years, since 2011, I've repeatedly revealed to the world what was done to me in the hope of preventing others suffering. Like Maitlis says, parading my pain, the endless bloody talking about it. I don't regret it, but the constant telling and retelling has been extremely painful and exhausting. With this book, I seek to free myself from my past. From now on, anyone who wants to know about what happened can sit down with Nobody's Girl and start reading. Today, I'm turning my sights to the future. I like to think about a time when all my surviving sisters and I might gather together again. Right before the pandemic hit, I'd rented a house for all of us in Aspen and told those of us who couldn't afford the airfare that I would buy their tickets if they wanted to come for the weekend. COVID-19 forced us to cancel that plan, but I still think about reviving it. The goal isn't to reopen old wounds. We've all done enough of that. I just want to spend a few carefree days with these women who understand me in ways no one else can. But mostly, what I need to do is be here, fully, for my family. In recent months, Robbie and I have moved toward a healthier way of living together. At my request, he took my pain pills away, on which I developed an over-reliance. It's rare that you hear people admitting to addictions like this. To soothe my physical and emotional pain, and then lock them away in our safe, changing the combination. Day by day, it was as if I was stepping out of a dense fog into a clearing where I could see again. For months, he'd been handling all our household chores, from grocery shopping to cooking to cleaning to all the drop-offs and pickups from the school. Now I've begun getting up early again. Recently, when Robbie said he wanted to get more serious about his martial arts practice, I told him he'd spend a few mornings at the gym. I could make the kids' lunches and ferry Ellie where she needs to go. Alex and Tyler both have their driver's licenses now. For the first time in a long time, my husband feels as if he can rely on me. That is the highest praise I could hope for. Robbie is seeing me once again, not merely as someone to take care of, but as his partner. And my children, Alex, who is 18, has graduated from high school. I've teased him that I'll never let him move out. Careful what you wish for. I'm joking. But he has an independent life, probably running his own business. Tyler, now 17, is enrolled in the highest level high school classes, which he is acing, and his Australian tertiary admission rank scores, sort of like SATs in the United States, are off the charts, which means his dreams of attending university and becoming an architect may well come true. My daughter, Ellie's the most badass teenage girl ever. She teaches me something every day. She has joined Australia's Emergency Services Cadets Program, which teaches young people the skills needed to respond to fires, floods, earthquakes. She's planning to be a paramedic to save people for a living, or maybe a paleontologist. Either way, she wants to learn to fly helicopters. Despite my own tomboy roots, or perhaps because of them, I'll admit there was a time when I tried to push her toward ballet lessons or the cheerleading squad. Ellie told me, no, I'd rather climb on someone's roof or rescue their dog. I'm buoyed by the knowledge that my kids will leave any realm they enter better than they found it. What more could a mother ask? Sometimes I fantasize that Ellie and I will eventually run a therapeutic horse farm together, doing for other people what Ruth Menor's Vince Ramos once did for me and so many others. And we may just pull that off. Not long ago, Robbie and I bought a 40-acre farm just outside of Perth. Already, we've got 3 sheep and 3 hives of bees, and Robbie has constructed the Taj Mahal of chicken coops. When I'm there, I wake up to the laughing sound of kookaburras and delight in watching kangaroos and emus making themselves at home right in front of our front yard. Robbie's next project, building me a pond with a little island in the centre. After that, we plan to convert an existing outbuilding that was once a quail hatchery into 4 horse stalls. I may never be able to ride because of my neck, but still, I know being around horses will do me good. If you've read this far, if you've watched this far, I hope my story has moved you to seek ways to free yourself from a bad situation. Say, to stand up for someone else in need, or to simply reframe how you judge victims of SA. Each one of us can make positive change. I truly believe that. I hope for a world in which predators are punished, not protected. Victims are treated with compassion, not shamed. And powerful people face the same consequences as anyone else. I yearn too for a world in which perpetrators face more shame than their victims do. And where anyone who's been trafficked can confront their abusers when they are ready, no matter how much time has passed. We don't live in this world yet. I mean, seriously. Where are those videotapes the FBI confiscated from Epstein's houses? And why haven't they led to the prosecution of any more abusers? Well, that's a whole other episode for another day. But I believe we could someday. Imagining it is the first step. In my mind, I hold a picture of a little girl reaching out for help and easily finding it. A picture of a girl, not a little girl. I picture a woman, too, who, having come to terms with her childhood pain, feels that it's within her power to take action against those who hurt her. If this book moves us even an inch closer to a reality like that, if it helps just one person, I will have achieved my goal. So sad that she gave up. There are some helplines that she's put at the back. In the UK, there is the National Domestic Abuse Helpline, the UK Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, Women's Aid. In Australia, there is 1-800-RESPECT, Anti-Slavery Australia, Lifeline Australia, and there's on the government website, there's Help and Support Ending Violence. In New Zealand, there's Women's Refuge, Samaritans, I won't be able to say that, Aotearoa, New Zealand, South Africa, there's SBCWC and TEARS, and the South African National Human Trafficking Hotline. She's not put the US numbers, but I'm sure if you go online, I think the first thing to do is to share with people that you trust privately, and then go from there. And always believe that your life is worth it, no matter how bad it feels at the time, I think is what we can take from this book. I mean, I just hope she's in a better place. Anyway, that's the end of the book. I found it really, really interesting, informative. There's bits just reading it again that I had kind of forgotten about. I think it's a shame that so much content gets really busy about these things for a short time, and then everyone just moves on to the next thing. But that's the way it goes, I guess. I just am in a small minority of people that prefers to be enlightened about these things. Guys, this is the book. I'm sure it's still available. I'm not sure if it's sold out, but I really recommend that everyone goes out and buys it. And that's the end of tonight's live stream. I hope that you have enjoyed it. And please join me again soon. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. R.I.P. Virginia Robert Guiffre. Good night.